Hello, Father Ken Barker from the Missionaries of God's Love. This is the second episode in the series on mercy and forgiveness. I've been saying that mercy is the highest quality in the heart of God. It's meant to be, of course, the highest quality in our hearts because of that. To the degree that we receive the Lord into ourselves, to that degree we'll have His heart for mercy. In the Scriptures, the word for mercy in Hebrew is, there's two words actually. First one's hesed, which means like God's faithfulness to His covenant, that God would remain faithful even if we're unfaithful. And so the Israelites could appeal to God for mercy because of His promise that He would be faithful to His covenant, that He would not count their faults against them. So that's characteristic of God. He doesn't count our faults against us. Therese of Lisieux has a quaint way of speaking about this. She says, the Lord has a great weakness. He's blind and He knows nothing about arithmetic. He doesn't know how to add up. And to blind Him especially and to prevent Him from adding the smallest sum, you must take Him by the heart. And that's His weakest spot, His heart of mercy. So to come to the Lord and crying out for mercy, He can't resist that cry. Psalm 130 speaks of this. Out of the depths I cry to You, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. And let Your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleading. If You, O Lord, should mark our guilt, Lord, who would survive? But with You is found forgiveness. So if You, O Lord, would mark our guilt, who would survive? But with You is found forgiveness. So He doesn't count our faults against us, and we can trust Him in this. And that's a great gift, isn't it? Because we're pretty good at counting other people's faults. But He's not like that, huh? So the other word is ramin, which is related to rehem, the womb of a mother in the Hebrew. It's like the feeling of a mother for the child in her womb, like the tenderness of a mother's heart for the child. So it sort of evokes goodness, tenderness, patience, understanding, readiness to forgive, and deep affection for us. Therese of Lisieux tells the story again in a quaint way of a child who had sort of done something wrong, and the mother was upset with the child and chided the child. And so the child went off into the corner and was just sulking in the corner, feeling sorry for itself. And she says, like, if the child just stays there, feeling sorry for itself, it'll be there for a long time in the darkness. But all the child needs to do, and what the child will often do, is just turn around and run back to Mama. Say, Mama, Mama, sorry, Mama. Kiss me, Mama. Won't do it again, Mama. And what mother would not then just take hold of her child and wrap the child in her loving arms and in tender embrace? She says that's what God is like. When we come to Him and take Him by the heart, He can't resist us. And that ramin of His immense affectionate love for us, which He wishes to embrace us with if we'll allow Him. Right? Now, the parable of the forgiving father, what we oftentimes call the prodigal son, is a beautiful parable in Luke 15 that sort of illustrates this for us. Remember, the younger son had deeply offended his father because he'd asked for his inheritance early, and that was more or less saying to his father, I wish you were dead. And then he left the family home, which you never did in those days, in those sort of circumstances, with the money. The father freely gave it to him, so much did he love him. And the son went off and started squandering all of this money on loose living until he gets to that place where he's just totally distraught and without anything and destitute, and finds himself with the pigs. Which is sort of like the lowest place you could imagine for a Hebrew person to be, amongst the pigs. And he thinks of his father's house, and he'll go and be a hired servant in his father's house. Is better than being in the pigs. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to him, the father, of course, is just simply waiting for him, and each day looking out for him, eager for his return, yearning for his son. And so when the father finally does, on that particular day, see his son returning, so disconsolate and downhearted, the father forgets himself and his dignity. He hitches up his long robes and he runs to the son and throws his arms around him and kisses him tenderly. And what we notice here is both those qualities of mercy are present. There's the Hesed, well, the father, no questions. He didn't say, how many women, what happened to the money, where were you? There were no questions at all. He doesn't count his faults against him. And then the Rehumin, of course, is the embrace, the tremendous embrace of tenderness and restoration of the son into his affectionate heart. That's what it's like with God. And the father is intent then of having a celebration. The fatted calf was to be killed and bring in the friends and we'll have a big party because his son had returned. What we need to notice is the other part of the story is the older son. The older son was unable to really celebrate at all. When he found out the news that his younger brother had returned, he's angry, he's bitter, he's contemptuous, and he's envious of how the father could put on a party when he hadn't done anything like that for him, and he'd stayed at home and worked through the heat of the day. So the older son then is not able to celebrate the return of his brother. He represents the Pharisees, who complained about Jesus eating with sinners and tax collectors. He's been a dutiful son, he's been law-abiding, he's respected amongst people, he's admired and praised for his virtue, but he lacks the quality of mercy. That's the problem. And he's condemning of his brother and his brother's faults, and he can't rejoice on his brother's return. He stands for like those religious people who are good at their religious practice and they're good in their doctrinal beliefs and they're good in their rituals, but they're not able to get in touch with their own weakness, their own brokenness, their own sinfulness in such a way that they can identify with those who have sinned greatly. And so they don't realize their own need for mercy. They're proud and conceited and hard-hearted. And this is how the Pharisees were, and this parable was told particularly to combat that sort of mentality. But the older son, he's just bitter, he's envious, he's cynical, he's self-righteous. He shuts himself out from the father's love. Left outside in the darkness, without joy, You see, we have a God who rejoices when one of his children returns. We have a God who dances. In Zephaniah it says, and the Father will dance on the day of joy. He will rejoice over you and renew you by his love. This is what our God is like. Remember Friedrich Nietzsche, the father of modern atheism. He said, I'll only believe in a God who dances. Well, he certainly hadn't read Zephaniah, because that's what it says. The Father will dance on the day of joy. He will rejoice over you and renew you by his love. So we don't want to be like the older son, shut out from the father's house, refusing to show mercy. Jesus says, be merciful just as your Father is merciful. So there's a great encouragement then to really open our hearts in mercy to those who may have failed greatly, those who may have fallen away, and to know that it's only by the grace of God that I have any ounce of virtue in me anyway. It's only by the grace of God. There but by the grace of God go I, I oftentimes think that when I go past a prison, I think, oh, well, there but by the grace of God go I. The life of those men who are in the prison, they're human beings like me. I could have ended that way too, but only by the grace of God. And we need to have that heart of mercy. Now, one of the spiritual works of mercy is the act of forgiveness. To be able to forgive someone who's wronged us. Jesus says, you received without charge, so give without charge. And you received much, so give much. Um, and mercy, of course, is the greatest gift that we have received. None of us could sort of claim any merit for that. It's unearned gift. It's God's precious gift to us. So when Peter asked Jesus, well, Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often should I forgive? 7 times, maybe? Peter thought that's pretty generous, isn't it? 7 times. And Jesus says, no, Peter, 77 times. 70 times 7, which was an Aramaic way of sort of saying, a Semitic way of saying, like, always, at every time you must forgive. Huh? So there's a beautiful reality about that. Just a story I came across a while ago in the south of London. There was a family, the Midson family. And Margaret Midson, the mother, they had 9 children. And so she's a good woman with her husband. And the children were at Catholic schools. And young Jimmy was an altar server at the age of 16, still serving on the altar. But a good football player and loved by many of the young people. Fun-loving young fellow. He's having his 16th birthday. And so his mother, Margaret, gave him some money to go down to the shop, at the baker's shop, and get some nice things for his birthday. So he went with his brother down to the shop, and while they were there, his brother, unfortunately, got into an altercation with another young man, and they were sort of heatedly arguing with one another. And Jimmy came over to try and sort of settle things down and made it worse. And in fact, this other man got so angry with Jimmy that he went outside and grabbed a shard of glass. The shards of glass they have at baker shops. And he came back in and he just smashed it over Jimmy's head. It cut his carotid artery, and so Jimmy very quickly died from blood coming out so badly, and in his brother's arms he died. And the family house was very close by, so Margaret was there very quickly, and of course she and her husband were just totally distressed and incredible sort of scene. And the next day, the news cameras arrived, TV cameras and news reporters and everything, wanting to have an interview. And surprisingly, they gave them an interview. And they asked Margaret, well, how do you feel? Well, how do you think she felt, But she said something very beautiful. She said, well, we have lost our son, and he was the sunshine of our eyes. We loved him. He was such a beautiful young man, so full of life and so generous and such a lot of fun. And we'll always know the loss. But she said, we'll always have a good memory of him. We'll be able to remember him in a beautiful way. And she said, so now what my heart is feeling now is for the mother of the other son, because she has to live with the reality of the monstrous act that her son has done. He'd been arrested and put in prison, and she said she has to live with that for the rest of her life. And we want them to know that we forgive their son, we forgive them for what he has done. Well, it was big news. It was the lead news item on every channel. And in every newspaper, it was headlines. Because it's so uncommon, isn't it, for people to actually forgive in this way, especially such a disastrous thing like that. But they really meant it. And they asked her, well, why would you do this? And still before the camera, she said, well, if we have anger and hatred towards this boy and towards the family, that will just increase the violence within the world today, the cycle of violence that we're all caught up in. She said, we must forgive. And she was simply espousing her Catholic faith, her faith as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, because that is what Jesus has taught us to do, to forgive, to let it go, to withhold the judgment, and to commend that person to the Lord and pray a blessing upon him. So it was a great witness, really, and made tremendous news, Another story that struck me was one from heaven, in a way. I remember Maria Goretti. She was a young 12, 13-year-old Italian girl. Was quite well developed, and there was a young man in the town named Alessandro, and he was, trying to seduce her in different ways, and she was resisting very much his seductive purpose. One day he came to the house when she was by herself, and he got so furious with her that he was resisting her. He grabbed her and tried to rape her, but she was fought off very, very strongly. And so he took out a knife and he began to stab her. And he stabbed her, I think it was 11 times all over her body. But she escaped from him. She started running towards the door. So he grabbed her and stabbed her another 3 times. And that time, they were fatal stabs. She was taken to hospital. She was still only just alive. And the priest that came to her asked her, do you forgive? And she says, yes, I do forgive. I do forgive, she said. And I pray that he'll be with me in paradise one day. Then she died. So Alessandro was put in prison for 30 years. And in these 8 years, he was unrepentant. He was not without remorse. But after 8 years, he had a dream that changed his life. In the dream, he saw this young woman in a beautiful white dress, and he knew it was Maria, and she was appearing to him, and she was carrying lilies, and she'd pick up a lily and hand that lily to him in the dream, and when he took hold of it, it would turn into a flame. And so she picked up each one, ended up giving him 14 lilies, one for each of the wounds that he inflicted upon her mortally. And she said to him, Alessandro, as I promised, your soul shall someday reach me in heaven. So when he woke up, he knew he had to change his life. He saw a priest, he confessed, and spent the rest of his time in prison in a prayerful sort of way. As soon as he got out of prison, after 27 years, he was given 3 years reprieve, and he went straight to Maria's mother, who was still alive, Assunta, and with Assunta, he asked forgiveness of her. And she said, yes, I've been waiting for you to come, Alessandro. Why didn't you come earlier? Yes, I do forgive you. And then the next day, the two of them went to Mass together, and they received Holy Communion together. The Jesus who they'd learnt to forgive from, they took into themselves. So his whole life was changed by the gift of mercy, you see, that he received from heaven, really, through Maria in her glorified state, and touched his heart and gave him the grace that he needed. It sort of like preceded his own capacity to be able to forgive. We're sometimes like that. We feel incapable of forgiving. We feel incapable of opening our hearts to somebody. But when we come to know God's mercy upon us, we can do that. It's his gift, really. And we'll talk more about this next time, how it is a gift, this mercy that comes upon us from God, and a capacity to forgive when we thought we could never forgive. So that young man, he lived for 89 years, really, but he became a Capuchin monk, lived a very holy life until the end of his days. And I'm sure he's now with Maria in heaven, rejoicing. So, my friends, let's take hold of the grace of forgiveness, the grace of God's mercy in our own personal lives, and No doubt there's people in your life who might still be struggling with to forgive. Most of us have people like that. We're going to talk more about it next time, about what it means to forgive, and what are the steps that we need to take. But most of all, ask God for the grace. It's His gift to us. And bless His name.